room right now, which is to hear Dr. Lisa Zimmerelli share her keynote address, Accompaniment in the Writing Center. Dr. Zimmerelli serves as Associate Professor and Chair in the Writing Department at Loyola University, Maryland. She is the former director of the Writing Center and co-authored a text that many of us here in the room use frequently with our tutors, the Bedford Guide for Writing Tutors. She won the Rhetoric Society Quarterly Charles Newper Award for Best Essay in 2013. And for her work in community engagement, she won the Loyola University Maryland Faculty Award for Excellence in Engaged Scholarship in 2015. And her essay, co-authored with her community partner, was selected for inclusion in Best Journals in Rhetoric and Composition 2017. She has also published essays in Rhetoric Society Quarterly, Rhetoric Review, WLN, a Journal of Writing Center Scholarship, Writing Center Journal, and edited collections. Lisa has played an important role in the Mid-Atlantic Writing Center Association over the years, as well as the broader field of writing centers and writing studies. We are honored to include her in our conference and look forward to the insights that she shares with our secondary school writing and learning center community. Lisa, welcome to the stage.
Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you here today in person, and then for those of you virtually, thank you for including me. Before I begin, for those visually impaired in the audience, I'm a brunette with long hair wearing a denim-y jumpsuit. My pronouns are she, her, and as an FYI, I'm going to be using, when I refer to a person as singular in this talk, I'm going to be using the their pronoun, not she or he, and it's not a grammatical error, it's intentional. So for example, the tutor brings their energy to the conference. I'd also like to give special acknowledgement again to the Conference Planning Committee, Jenny Goranson, Stacy Hahn, Vivian Blair, Heather Barton, Leslie Goach, and Rebecca Shields. I've chaired a few conferences myself over the years, and I can assure you that whatever effort you think you went into it, multiply it by 1,000%. We put on these conferences for our community as a labor of love. As we proceed today, I'd like to suggest that we be sure to appreciate all the ways that this conference brings us together and helps us grow. And whatever minor hiccups we experience, let's just let them go, okay? With all sincerity, thank you, Jenny, Stacy, Vivian, Heather, Leslie, and Rebecca, for what you have managed to pull off this weekend for all of us. Okay, so let's get started. This is a slide of my writing center at Loyola. I wanted you to see what my home looks like. If we were there now, I would invite you to grab a cup of coffee, a slice of fresh baked bread. We do bake bread every day in the writing center, or a bag of popcorn, and make yourself at home. I'd also make sure that you had what you needed to take notes. And I see that you got those notebooks, so you're going to need them during this keynote. We're not in my writing center today, but I still want to make sure you're comfortable and ready. So if you need to get up for any reason, like a bio break or to stretch or to get a refill of coffee, I want you to go right ahead. I won't consider it rude, okay? I have to tell that to my first year students in my college composition class, because they're used to, like in high school, they're like, can I go to the bathroom? Like, you guys can stop asking me to go to the bathroom. You can just go to the bathroom if you need to. And there's going to be a few times during my talk, I'm going to ask you to take notes. So be ready for that as well. I'm so excited that I get to kick off the Secondary School Writing Centers Association and the Northern Virginia Writing Project Writing Center Conference. And my goal in the next half hour or so that I have you is to reframe for you the significance, the meaning of the work that you do in the Writing Center. I'm going to suggest that the conversations and the interactions between two people who talk about writing have the potential to be profoundly important and transformative beyond the walls of your writing center. What we're going to talk about this morning is accompaniment in the writing center. Now, what is accompaniment? When you saw the word accompaniment, how many of you thought of music? Accompaniment may have called to mind for many of you the instruments that accompany me, say your own voices, a lead singer, an opera, a Broadway show. Do I have any musicians in the crowd? Right, so you know what that is. If you Google accompaniment, you get a whole lot of food references though. So as in like the various accompaniments that are served up with main courses. So take, for example, the Thanksgiving table, and we have like cranberry sauce, right? Gravy, stuffing. And of course, accompaniment in fashion are those little extra things that just elevate it all. The perfect shade of nail polish, the super adorable shoes, the fabulous earrings, the right watch. In short, accompaniment is the icing on top, value added, complimentary. For those of you who use the Bedford Guide for Writing Tutors, this might be a really great metaphor for exercise 9B, creating a metaphor for tutoring, right? The tutoring is like the extended metaphor assignment. How many of you have written that assignment? Have you done that one? So that's my favorite assignment in the book. And sometimes I'll have my students create like a poster, like a visual representation, and we'll hang them around our writing center. For our topic of accompaniment today, a tutor might riff off of tutoring is like setting the perfect Thanksgiving spread, complete with accompaniment, or tutoring is like pulling together the just right outfit for that special occasion, complete with polish and shoes. But that's not what I'm talking about today. It's not what I'm talking about today. Accompaniment in the Writing Center is more than that. It's much more than you, the tutor, as value added in a student's writing process. Rather, I'm going to suggest that accompaniment in the Writing Center is central. It's integral to a way of being and presence that has much farther reaching implications and possibilities. The concept of accompaniment is as old as humanity itself and has been captured in our earliest myths, legends, and literature. Some of you may be familiar with the 4,000-year-old ancient epic poem from Mesopotamia of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Do they make you read that still? Yeah, my middle schoolers? Is that my, like, wow. Enkidu is sent by the gods to stop Gilgamesh from oppressing the people of Uruk. However, the two decide to journey together to slay a giant, becoming close, committed friends in the process. And because of the friendship, Gilgamesh experiences profound transformation. In a word, he is a different man because, he is a different man because of his relationship with Enkidu. And even after Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh's actions are impacted by the idea of the memory of Enkidu. We also have biblical references. Sorry, I just lost my place here. Sorry. I hit something. We also have biblical references of mutual companionship and support, like the lifelong friendship between Mary and Martha. And we have Beowulf and Wiglaf, of course. Do you also have to read that too? No. Okay, so in the 10th century Old English Anglo-Saxon poem, Wiglaf journeys with Beowulf to slay the dragon and has been characterized as the epitome of courage, loyalty, and strength. Like Gilgamesh and Enkidu, one survives the other. In this case, Wiglaf survives Beowulf, but his journey is also forever altered because of the friendship and experience. And of course, you guys have to read Hamlet, right? Like some Shakespeare. Horatio is well known as Hamlet's trusted confidant in the Shakespeare play. Okay, so although all of the English teachers here today may be appreciating these references, before I lose the middle schoolers and the high schoolers, let me suggest that accompaniment is even more prevalent in TV shows and movies. There are countless examples in popular media that capture the human need to have accompaniment in life's many journeys. With a friend, all things are possible. Before I continue, let's take a pause. All right, so now here's a little interactive activity. So I'd like for you to take a minute right now, just jot it down, to think of one or two more examples, okay? So a couple more examples of accompaniment, of like pairs that were with each other on a journey. So this can be from literature or religion or popular culture. It can even be from your personal life. So just jot down a couple of examples. Take like a minute. Okay, so now, some of you are like already doing this because you're brilliant. Turn to your neighbor and just share, right? Maybe turn to someone you don't know, like turn around. If there's someone that you haven't met yet that's within earshot, and share. Okay, so I'm gonna call you back. All right, does anyone want to, anyone have like super fun example? Oh, okay, all right, so with the green cap. Yep. You wait. Okay, another one? I don't know who they are. Grey's Anatomy, okay, sorry. Yes. Of course, fabulous. All right, one more in the back there. Forks and spoons are fabulous accompaniment. Okay, excellent, especially like when they're going over the moon, right? Okay, so let's take a minute to, and we're going to come back to that, so you'll have time to chat some more about it. But let's take a moment to recap before we move on. So accompaniment is characterized by friendship and support, loyalty and conviction, counsel and advice, bravery and fortitude. In the Writing Center, the tutor is all of these things to the tutee. And as they work their way through the writing process, feedback means freedom. It means the path opens up and the journey gets easier. Accompaniment is central to this process and therefore central to the work of the Writing Center. The idea of accompaniment as deep, meaningful companionship has been perhaps the most fully and best described by the Jesuits. And I see Loyola Blakefield's here, is that right? Or are they maybe virtual? Well, hi, Loyola Blakefield virtually. They're right down the road from me. Okay, so why am I bringing in the Jesuits? What's religion got to do with what we do in the Writing Center? Well, first of all, I'm a professor at Loyola University, Maryland, a school in the Jesuit Catholic tradition. Do we have any other Jesuit schools here? I just noticed Loyola Blakefield. So although I'm not a Catholic or even religious myself, I've learned a lot from my Jesuit colleagues. And I often find the intellectual, what we might call the ideological framework that comes with my school, helpful in seeing something in a new light. The last few years, I've come to appreciate accompaniment as one of the Jesuit concepts that resonates particularly well with the teaching and tutoring of writing, especially as we navigated COVID. The idea of accompaniment helped me to think about how I teach writing with fresh perspective and insight. And I hope in sharing more about it today, the idea of accompaniment does the same for you and your work in the Writing Center too. But first, a little history lesson. So who are the Jesuits? The Jesuits are a particular order of the Catholic Church, and from the earliest days were sort of rebels and iconoclasts. They were, still are, deeply committed to reform, serving the disenfranchised in urban communities and education. Indeed, as early as the 16th century, the Jesuits started the first colleges across Europe, and accompaniment was a key element of their educational platform. In both their roles as teachers and as priests, Jesuits defined accompaniment as the concept that the most effective role a person can play in another person's spiritual and educational development is to walk alongside them in their journey. In the words of the founder of the Jesuits, St. Ignatius, if retreatants advance considering matters for themselves, they find more relish and spiritual fruit than if their director explains to them and amplifies the meaning of the events. In other words, accompaniment presumes the inherent capacity of every person with support to grow on their intellectual and spiritual journey. Rooted in the Jesuit understanding of the sacredness of human life and relationships, accompaniment encourages active listening, support, and an understanding that people who are in vulnerable situations or facing challenging tasks require a compassionate and empathetic approach. Accompaniment, therefore, involves building relationships of mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual learning so that both parties are making meaningful contributions to the shared endeavor. And together, they can arrive at deeper understanding and insight. Before we move on, I'd like for you to go back to the examples of accompaniment. Oh, but if you want to read more, right? the QR code for you. And then before we move on, though, I want you to go back to the examples of accompaniment that you came up with. Okay, so I'm going to put up all of those, like the list from the two slides. And I want you now to reflect on how specifically think about the pairs that you came up with and how do they embody these qualities. So what actions did they take, or how was their presence with each other or their accompaniment together? How did they embody any of these qualities? So just take a moment now to kind of think and reflect on that. Okay, I'm going to call you back. Does anybody want to share just a specific way that their pairs accompanied each other? One specific way. Yes. Great. So Rick and Morty. Morty always helps to get new friends. Okay, excellent. Yes. Yeah.
Or Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
And they show accompaniment by using
Respected trust between each other. Absolutely. Yeah, it's super critical to that relationship. Maybe one more? Yes. You might, and vice versa, for sure. Yeah, cereal is like no good with a fork. All right, yeah, and one more. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I had Lori and Lane from Gilmore Girls.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. My daughters wanted me to add that one in, and it was too many slides. Yep, for sure. Great, perfect. Okay, so thank you. So before I can continue, I do want to make a note about the Jesuits. And so although I appreciate much about the Jesuit philosophical approach to education and like thus this talk, right? I wish not to present an overly glorified or uncritical characterization of the Jesuits. To be clear, the Jesuits were slaveholding. They owned, operated, and profited from several plantations in Maryland, for example, in the 18th and 19th centuries. This isn't speculation, but fact. With a professor of history at Loyola, a colleague of mine, we mentored and supervised a group of 20 students last summer and fall. We poured through several archives, went on an archaeological dig, and together began to construct a revised and accurate history of the connection between slavery and the founding of Loyola University, Maryland. We also documented years of persistent white supremacy that continue to affect our campus and the lived experience of Black and Brown students to this day. Our book, a collection of historical essays, rhetorical analysis, argument, creative nonfiction, short fiction, and poetry, will be out in the fall. I'm a different person and professor for this experience with my students. And one of the things that struck me as we worked together was how reflective and discerning my students were about acknowledging this inexcusable past while figuring out how to retain what they have come to love about their Loyola community and appreciate about the Jesuit philosophical approach to education. Indeed, what my students and I shared together this past year was a journey in the Jesuit tradition of accompaniment, a physical, intellectual, and emotional journey, and even for some of my students whose faiths were tested by their discoveries, a spiritual journey. In short, we were accompanying each other as we uncovered and told this history. Such accompaniment happens every day in the Writing Center. I hope you can already see how accompaniment resonates with other foundational principles and concepts in the Writing Center, such as collaboration, community, and contact zones. And such dictums as, so these are just like mission statements from Writing Center web pages, right? So teach the writer, not writing. Tutors are coaches and collaborators, not teachers. Lots of talk about conversation, peer tutoring, collaboration. And if you think about your own mission statements and your own writing centers, this probably resonates, right? Writing people are obsessed with investigating and exploring the exchange between tutor and student, because we understand, we know that something magical happens in the time and the space between two people who are talking about writing. In a word, accompaniment, this presence, is where the magic happens. Accompaniment in the Writing Center takes many forms. Each of these interactions is unique and requires, therefore, a unique kind of accompaniment. Of course, at the heart of most writing centers is peer tutoring, with students accompanying other students in their writing process. Many writing centers also have teachers who tutor students. I know that for my faculty tutors in our writing center, they treasure the opportunity to tutor in the writing center. It allows them to have a different relationship with the student because they are not assigning a grade, but simply assisting with the writing. Accompaniment is also at the core of the Writing Center director and tutor relationship, with directors mentoring tutors as they develop their own unique tutoring identities, styles, and strategies. And as you all know, because you're being accompanied today by your directors, the conference is a perfect case in point of that. Finally, Pikachu, for those of us in leadership roles in writing centers, directors, associate directors, assistant directors, other staff positions, we also accompany each other on our professional journeys. So this is the former associate, oh, it didn't go through. Wait, did it not go through? There it is. This is the former associate director of the University Notre Dame Writing Center. This is like from a decade ago. There was a conference that was held at Halloween in Disney, the International Writing Centers Association conference. I took a bunch of tutors, she took a bunch of tutors, and we dressed up. And then she proposed to her girlfriend that weekend, but she was in a different outfit. All right, so there's a little bit of a lag. Okay, that's fine. We can skip that, Scott. All right, so it's time to move on to some philosophical premises underlying accompaniment in the Writing Center, and then some specific strategies for how we might ensure that we are in a mode of accompaniment with our students. Accompaniment in the Writing Center is the act of serving as a trusted friend and companion who walks alongside a student as they embark on their writing process. The tutor offers encouragement, presence, empathy, and insight. Because of their attentiveness and their sincere belief in every individual's capacity for transformative growth, the tutor also inspires confidence, resilience, and hope in the writer. All right, so that sounds great, but how does this happen in action in the Writing Center? Here's what we assume if we are engaged in true accompaniment. Our tutee is always, first and foremost, a unique person. We cannot presume to know anything about the student we are working with until we take the time to get to know them through conversation. We have to remind ourselves of this all the time. How many of you have made snap judgments about a student and then were surprised by what came up in conversation or was revealed in that paper? Similarly, the one who accompanies the tutor also cannot presume to know how the writer and their writing will develop beforehand. Rather, this can only be revealed from the writer themselves. It is therefore important not to have too rigid a model or practice when tutoring. When accompanying a student, you should be mindful of not allowing yourself to get ahead of them. You may want to fix everything, for example, in the hour you have with a student or the half hour you have with a student. But the most important thing is for that student in that moment, might simply be to talk out the development of their thesis or their first major point. Accompaniment in the Writing Center therefore takes patience. You need to make sure not to speak for the student and not try to hurry the process. You might feel like you know exactly what the writer needs to do next, but to accompany the writer, you should encourage them to figure this out for themselves and remind them to be patient with themselves. Remind them that writing is a process. Remind them to make another appointment. Fourth, intellectual transformation can be grueling, difficult, especially when it comes to writing. We all know this, and we've all been there. It often takes courage and resilience. The encouragement, positivity, and advocacy a tutor provides are crucial. So we're gonna get meta. Do you all know what that means? We're gonna get meta for a second. So it's like when we talk about the thing we're talking about. And let's take this keynote, for example. So like this keynote. So I finished a draft about a week ago, and I shared it then with my boyfriend, who's here, who's a graphic designer, and he had offered to help me, like, you know, and I thought he was going to like fix the fonts and the colors. And instead, I got super important feedback, which changed my thinking about it. And so like the structure, even a few claims, the order, like I really had to like go back to it. And it was hard. Like I worked on it again all week long. And so revising was way more than I anticipated, but I felt confident. I was excited, even super excited that I could do it because I was being accompanied, right? I had that confidence. And this then gets to my fifth principle. Growth happens through conversation, that continual process of asking questions, a back and forth that is deliberate and intentional and draws out the best in the other person. So I thought, to get back to my example, when I asked for feedback on this presentation, I was simply like going to get the answers, like how to fix it, right? What I got instead was a lot of, well, why did you do that? Why did you choose that image? What actually do you want your takeaway to be? Who is your audience, right? So we had a lot of conversations to arrive at this final presentation. And I needed those conversations in order for it to like develop as it did. I also at this moment want to like remind you that sometimes like trust matters. So start small sometimes, have silly, feel free to have silly, fun conversations because you're creating a space in which bigger issues can come up later. So finally, principle number 6, the tutor sheds the light and warmth of their own experience on the task at hand. Accompaniment in the Writing Center is understanding and appreciating and empathizing how hard writing can be, but then it's also sharing how great the reward is on the other side. We're nearing the close of my talk. I'd like to challenge you as you participate in the conference this weekend to think about the various strategies you'll learn about in the next 2 days through this lens of accompaniment. How can you take what you learned this weekend and apply it to the journey you take with each student you tutor? Because I really do think an approach of accompaniment matters in a big way, not just as a tool or a friendly reminder to be present. I'd like to close now by suggesting that accompaniment is a way of centering the work that we do within the larger educational enterprise, and it's tied to the basic tenets of civic democracy and civil society. Remember when I said that the concept of accompaniment goes back millennia? Well, I wasn't kidding. And I'd argue that writing centers go back millennia too. Let's start with the first writing centers in Egypt 10,000 years ago. The tutors were the Kemetic people, and their buzzword of the day was mot. Mot is one of many African words for which there is no English, like single English word equivalent. It means simultaneously truth, justice, order, harmony, balance, reciprocity, and propriety. And mot was super, super critical as the predominant societal like organizing principle. That is to say, mot was what inspired our ancestors to form the foundations of society. So fast forward to about 300 years later in Athens, where teachers like Socrates, Aspasia, Plato, and Aristotle were also, for all intents and purposes, directing writing centers. They were profoundly concerned with how the teaching of rhetoric and writing might draw out the best in a person and therefore the best in society. And they called this arete. It might be a reet, I'm actually not sure, but I like arete, so that's what we're calling it right now. Arete was the effective use of one's skills to the best of one's abilities. Wit, bravery, intelligence, physical strength for the greater good. Arete created harmony in the community, helped facilitate democracy itself. Like mot, arete was super, super critical as the predominant societal organizing principle. That is to say, like mot, arete was what inspired the Athenians to form the foundations of their society. Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot to put up arete. Arete. So, and I forgot that slide too. Sorry. All right. So here's where accompaniment comes in. The Egyptians believed that Mot was drawn out through the exchange between Seshamu, and that like translates as leader, and Shemsu, which is translated as follower, kind of. Importantly, this relationship was not hierarchical, but rather an egalitarian relationship between leaders and their core followers, with their roles like frequently switching. It was like not static. It was very, very and fluid. In the quest for a better society and the attainment of Mot, leaders and followers were considered to be inseparable co-creators, always in motion, giving and receiving, pushing and pulling, leading and following. In short, always accompanying the other. Similarly, Athenian philosophers argued that arete was innate in everyone. Everyone had it, but it needed to be drawn out through the dialectical method. And the dialectical method required conversation between two people. It was also a back and forth, which helped both arrive at a greater truth. In short, arete also required accompaniment. Fast forward to our current moment. Amidst the hyper distractions that surround us, the pings and the ringtones, sounds which beckon us to distraction, bells and whistles which often contain empty promises of intimacy, can we return to the importance of the writing center as we once understood it? In the writing center, as you tutor and as you connect with another person over their writing, how can you embark on a journey of shared humanity, of accompaniment? How can you create a vibrant place for Mot and arete for the pursuit of excellence for the common good? Thank you.
Okay, so at my writing center, we read Longman's. How does the 12-step process tie into your theory or like your explanation of Mot?
You read what? I'm sorry.
So like the 12-step process in the book.
I'm sorry. You read what book?
The Bedford Guide.
Oh, the Bedford book, not Longman's.
Oh, that's okay. Okay.
So the 12-step, how does that tie into the explanation of Mot?
Which 12 steps? The 12 steps of.
Or like, what's it called then?
The process.
The process there. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, in the writing process.
Yes.
How does it tie into Mot? Okay, no, sorry. Gotcha. Thanks. Well, I would say that that's a great question. So if Mot is like drawing out like the best, right? And that's the goal. You can't just arrive, or we would argue that you can't just arrive at like a fabulous paper, right? You can't come and then it gets fixed, right? You edit it, quote unquote, and then like, there you go, there's your awesome paper. But rather like the process is in fact where like someone can like come into a better sense of themselves as a writer. Because it's not really about, I mean, we want them to do on that paper, of course, right? But really at the end of the day, we want them to, the next time they go to write, the next time they go to think about that thing, they have a new perspective or they have a new tool that they can use. And so I think that's how it ties in, because it's really developing that sense of that person as a thinker, as a writer, as, you know, and depending on the topic of the paper, other things might be revealed through conversation that we need to get at in that paper as well. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Okay,
you.
You bet. Okay. Awkwardly go by the.
No,
It's totally okay.
I was gonna go to the restroom.
You go to the restroom.
I'm thinking of a question.
Does anyone have a question? Anyone else? Or want to share a parent? Yes, we have someone in the back. You're off the hook.
Hi, so when you're talking about accompaniment, when we're dealing with tutor and tutor relationships that have a very large age gap and have that kind of like social hierarchy, what's the best way to develop empathy and develop that accompaniment with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when there is any kind of gap, right, whether it's age or another kind of demographic factor thrown in there, is really that active listening piece and understanding that like you as the tutor need to kind of check yourself and make sure you're not jumping in and presuming, like you're not assuming that gap signifies superiority, let's say that. And instead that gap is simply a gap, It, you know, it is just a difference, but it is not a difference with one superior than the other. And so if there's difference, like how we achieve, like how we cross that gap is through listening, right? And through like being present. And then like following the lead of our student.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you. Hi.
So in one of your slides, when you had quotes from other books, one of them said that tutors are coaches and collaborators and not teachers. So in a similar vein to the last question, how might you implement that kind of idea into tutors via, the teaching and training that goes along with making a writing center?
So the idea that tutors aren't teachers, they're
Aren't
coaches
teachers, yeah.
and collaborators. Yeah. I mean, I think this is super tricky because we say that all the time. And yeah, I like what I hear sometimes in our writing center, even when I'm with my students, and I try to have like a writing center with my own students, like kind of like thing go with my students. I still like sometimes feel this impulse that like, I'm not doing my job if I'm not teaching them. And I'm not, like they have to walk away with like something better, or like I failed them in some way. And I think that that's like a supernatural, understandable impulse. But, if you think about coaches, to take that metaphor, and that's still, there's some hierarchy there, right? Like I wouldn't use that language if it were my writing center, but like, I get it. But, coaches are there like alongside, and it is not, they're assisting and helping their athletes like get to a place where they need to get so they can play the best game. Collaborators, I love that, more than anything else, because it really does assume that the two people together, there's not one person, this kind of is like the other answer too. There's not one person with all the knowledge that can then impart to, the student, but rather there's a person who might have more experience, might have, fresh perspective, will have fresh perspective, but that simply will like lend itself then to the conversation so that the students, the tutee, whatever you call your students, your writer, can like develop themselves. And that person has to contribute. And once that person contributes, then they become a collaborator. And what I love too about that whole idea of like the SSWCA and like the leader follower in Mott is that for those of you who are teachers in the room, like we've been there, right? Where all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, like I never thought of this thing this way. I'm a changed person because my student wrote about this in this way. And we become like the follower in that moment. And that's when I think like true collaboration happens.
Thank you.
Great question. Thanks. We have time.
So what can we as tutors do to teach our tutees how to reap the benefits of accompaniment when they don't have the opportunity to go through the writing process with someone else?
I'm sorry, repeat one more time.
So what can we as tutors do to teach the tutees how to reap the benefits of accompaniment when they don't have someone to accompany them on the writing journey?
So like when they're just coming at the very end.
Yeah, or just like, obviously we are teaching them skills for writing beyond when they're with us. So what can we do to make sure that they know how to reap the benefits of accompaniment when they're not with
like
us?
what, like specifics. So like, I'm a strong believer in like being super clear about like what exactly you're doing like in that moment. So like when I teach my students writing and like I'm super flexible with deadlines, but I don't want them to think like that means I'm like chill, I'm gonna give everyone an A. Even that like, I want them to work really hard still. And so I say to them, this should be hard. This will be hard, but like, you're going to be fine. Like you're going to get a good grade because we're working together on it. Like, but I tell them that. So I would say, like when you're accompanying a student, to say, this paper is part of a writing process. Tell me a little bit more about like how you started this. Then tell me what you did when you did this. Like, where do you see that you might have like had a few hiccups in that beginning? Did you write this last night? Like, how was that experience for you? How might you shift that next time? Like all of those things to just really make them, it's like bringing out their awareness of their own writing process, because that's what's needed sometimes. Like students aren't even aware of like writing process as a concept. So just like speaking to it very directly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. So going off of the last question, how would you deal with a student who's like less willing to listen? How would you implement the writing process like with a student who's less willing to listen to you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think accompaniment is super challenging in those moments because our inclination is to like then just like put on our, well, I can fix this hat because you're not even engaging with me. So one strategy that I do with students who are resistant to being in the moment with me when I'm tutoring or when I'm teaching even, and I'm working with students one-on-one, is I'm okay with silence and with walking away from that. And I also like, it's a judgment-free zone. Like, I don't know why they're like stone cold maybe, or I don't know why they're not like giving me affect about their paper. More often than not, they're like super anxious. And if anything, I need to have like compassion for them in that moment. So like, one, like, don't take it personally. Like, it probably is about them and their own paper and their whatever else is going on in their lives. And then two, like, I will walk away sometimes. I'll say, okay, like, I would love for you to think about X, Y, or Z. I need to go get a cup of coffee, or I need to use the restroom. I'll be back in a couple minutes. Can you jot down some things? And it usually works. Like, if you give people a task, most people will like do that task. And so just giving them some space to and a prompt to engage can be helpful. Or have them read aloud too. Like, read aloud is nice.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Claire.
Are we out of? Okay. I'd be happy to talk with you after. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.